for a couple of things. First of all, there's some loose ends from last week to tie up, Aleph. And basically, a lot of people are away, so I don't want to, to go on to the next shlab. But we have what to do to finish up from last week. So, just for a few minutes, trying to sum up what we've seen so far, and then we'll go weiter from it. Okay, so what we've been discussing for the past couple of weeks is the sugya of the Erev, the history of the Erev, who they were. So we spent 1 week talking about, in a practical sense, who these people were. And we saw different opinions in Chazal. We saw, the opinion of the Medrash. How do you? Sorry. Yeah. So we saw the opinion of the Medrash that millions of people that were in Mitzrayim were the Erev Rav. We saw the opinion of the Zohar Kaddish that these were the upper echelon, the sorcerers of Mitzrayim, and so on. We spent the time in that week. And last week, that's really where we began to talk about, in terms of the neshamas of the Erev Rav, who they were and their part in Klal Yisrael. So very, very quickly, and then we'll see the first marmakim in the page that you have in front of you that sort of will sum up a little bit of what we saw last time. Okay, so what we saw last time was, and again, for those that didn't hear last week, this might be sounding a little bit strange, but it is what it is. We saw last week is that there are two parts to Nishmas Yisrael. Every neshama has two parts. Again, we didn't really go into the sugya of understanding the different qualities of these parts and the different jobs and different levels, but two basic parts: the body of the neshama and the head of the neshama. That's the language that the Rizal uses: the body of the neshama, the das, the head of the neshama. And what we saw is that those two parts of Nishmas Yisrael B'chlal were damaged by Adam and Chava. The first part, the body of the neshama of Nishmas Yisrael, was damaged through the Aveira of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, which, although when we read the Psukim, it's about eating the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but according to the Arizal, according to the Zohar Kaddish, that's not the main part of the Aveira. The main part of the Aveira was Adam and Chava being together as husband and wife before Shabbos. That was the main part of the Aveira. And whenever husband and wife are together, especially Adam and Chava, it's going to bring the Shamas to the world. And what that act did was bring the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael, that lower part, that bottom half, the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael, quote unquote, that was brought to the world through that act of Adam and Chava, but in a damaged way, because it was pre-Shabbos, it was before Shabbos. And then we saw from the Rizal, and that part of the neshama, the body of the neshama, has to therefore go through its tikkun, has to go through its process of fixing, and that was the primary job of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to be misakin, and they were able to do such a thing, to be misakin the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael, the body of the souls of Nishmas Yisrael. So by the time Yaakov Avinu comes, and he has the Shvatim, and so on and so forth, the 70 souls, that was the perfected state of the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael. That's, by the way, why it's Shivim Nefesh, is 70 souls. Because when we talk about this system of a body and a head, we know in the writings of the Rizal, it's always the number 10. 3 is Chochmah, Bin, and Das. That's the 3 qualities, the 3 koiches of the intellect. And the 7 qualities that are more related to the body and emotion, the lower levels, are Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzachot, Yisod, and Malchus. So 7 always means body, 3 always means head. So the Shivim Nefesh, the 70 souls, which is 7 times 10, always means a sense of completion. It's sort of like a complete system of body. So the 70 souls means the complete tikkun, the rectified version of the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael, which needed fixing because of Adam and Chava bringing them to the world with them being together before Shabbos. So that's in terms of the body. Now we saw last week is that Adam and Chava, after being kicked out of Gan Eden, spent 130 years in separation doing tshuva. But during that time, there was residual effect of that original sin. And we saw, according to Chazal, that Adam, there was some levels, again, ba'inus, against his will, levels of Pagam Habris that took place during those 130 years. And those situations of Pagam Habris during those 130 years brought down the heads of Nishmas Yisrael, brought them down into the world, but in a way of Pagam, in a way that was damaged. So just as the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael needed tikkun, and that took place through Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and the 70 souls, so too the heads of Nishmas Yisrael also needed tikkun because of those 130 years. Because again, during those 130 years, they were brought into the world, spiritually speaking, but in a nifgam, in a pogrom dik way. So what was their history? The history of the heads of Nishmas Yisrael. That's what we spoke about primarily last week. And we saw that the first time where those neshamas were born into the physical reality after those 130 years, with the first opportunity to fix themselves, was the Dar HaMabul. Obviously, it didn't work out, right? And there was huge pagama bris because that's what they knew. That's what those neshamas came to the world from. That was the first opportunity. Obviously, it didn't work out. The second Gilgul of the heads of Nishmas Yisrael was in the Dar HaFlaga. Also didn't work out. The third opportunity for the heads of Nishmas Yisrael to come to the world was with the city of Sodom and Amorah. Also didn't work out. And now finally the fourth opportunity, and the fourth is it. That's the last opportunity. That's it. And then, if not that, then who knows what would have been. The fourth opportunity we saw was that these neshamas were reincarnated a fourth time in Mitzrayim. And what we saw last week is that as the 70 souls, the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael, make their way to Mitzrayim and develop and improve, and they multiply to 600,000 to millions of Yidden, right? So then the process that takes place in Mitzrayim is that there is a transfer. There's a chalipin that takes place of the heads of Nishmas Yisrael that found themselves amongst the Egyptians. But once the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael, the 70 souls and their offspring, find their way in Mitzrayim, then a union takes place where the souls of the heads of Nishmas Yisrael are reunited with their bodies, and now the tikkun for those heads can take place in a healthy way. And what was the tikkun for those neshamas, the heads of Nishmas Yisrael? They not only needed to be fixed from the original sin of those 130 years, but also the Dar HaMabul, Haflag, and Sodom. So that's what we saw Barichas last week. We're not going to go into details of this, but the entire slavery of Mitzrayim, with all the difficulties of Mitzrayim, and even the mitzvahs that they were given after Yetzias Mitzrayim, leading up to Har Sinai, it was all custom made to bring a tikkun to the heads of Nishmas Yisrael. That's what we saw, and then the ability to misakin that is because finally the bodies of Klal Yisrael find their way in Mitzrayim because of Yosef and the whole story, and that union takes place between the head and the body. And now we could actually get going in terms of fixing Klal Yisrael. That's what we saw last week. Now, in order to what we mentioned as well, we're going to see also over here, in order to allow that transfer to be as smooth as possible, to allow the neshamas, the heads of Nishmas Yisrael, which were amongst the Egyptians, for it to be transferred smoothly and easily to the bodies of Klal Yisrael, that there shouldn't be any Jewish souls or any part of a Jewish soul left over in Mitzrayim, but it should all be reincorporated into the descendants of Avram Avinu in a healthy way, and to go through their tikkun. We saw this was the primary objective of Yosef HaTzadik in Mitzrayim, making certain decrees on the Egyptians, in particular Egyptians, and forcing them to have a bris milah. We saw this, that according to Chazal, Yosef HaTzadik compels many Egyptians to have a bris milah. And the reason for that is because by giving those particular Egyptians a bris milah, it was with divine inspiration. Yosef HaTzadik saw in those Mitzrayim a trapped head of a neshama of a yid in those particular Egyptians, and by giving them a bris milah, that's going to allow the transfer as Hashem, when the 70 souls come in some time, and then the time is ripe for that transfer to take place, because that Egyptian had a bris. And that neshama that's trapped in that Egyptian experienced the kedushas habris. So Mamela, there's going to be a little bit of an easier transition from that Egyptian over to a neshama, over to a yid. Otherwise, it would have been too difficult. Now, getting to the Erev Rav, so we saw, and this we're going to see a little bit more right now, is that even after Yosef HaTzadik's efforts of giving the Egyptians a bris milah, and we'll see other inyanim that Yosef HaTzadik did in order to allow that transfer to take place. And for the most part, most of those neshamas of the heads of Klal Yisrael did transfer over to the bodies of Klal Yisrael, and sum total, those Jews went through the catharsis and the difficulties of Mitzrayim, and they come out the other end completely purified and rectified and ready for Har Sinai. The problem is not all the heads of Nishmas Yisrael were able to be siphoned off, and the remaining neshamas of the heads of Klal Yisrael, the heads of Nishmas Yisrael, that were unable or unwilling to be transferred to the Jewish people and to experience the exile in a way that would fix them, those remaining heads of Nishmas Yisrael stuck in Mitzrayim, in Egyptians, that's what we call the Erev Rav. And so Moshe Rabbeinu, as we're going to see about today a little bit, Moshe Rabbeinu had a very strong connection to all of Klal Yisrael, to all the Neshamas of Klal Yisrael, specifically the heads of Klal Yisrael, as Moshe Rabbeinu is the head of Klal Yisrael B'chlal, we'll see soon. So because of that, Moshe Rabbeinu was desperate to get these Neshamas out. And this was the dialogue between him and the Rabbanu Shalom. Are they ready to be taken out or not? Because Moshe Rabbeinu understood that if I take them out without these neshamas transferring to the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael, without going through the slavery and the tikkun and everything, so if I take these Erev Rav, these Mitzrayim, these physical Egyptians out, because they have contained within them, stuck within them, imprisoned within them, heads of Nishmas Yisrael, then that means I'm going to be saving those neshamas, but I'm also going to be taking all the psilas, all the filth that comes with those Egyptians as well. Because again, let's bear in mind, we have a klal from the Torah, that the higher something is, until it has its tikkun, until it's fixed and it's rectified, the higher something is, the lower it can descend. Right? The lower it can descend. It's the biggest neshamas in the world that find themselves in the lowest places. The Arizal, in fact, talks about this. We find this in Svarim, that very often, when a big neshama comes to the world, where it's time for a big neshama to be born into the world. By the way, the point of all this is not to creep anyone out or to freak anyone out. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it's Torah, and hopefully it should mechazik us. And again, all this is leading up to figuring out what the avodah of Shmir Sabris is practically. Because again, even on a very simple level, what we've seen so far, and this is how we ended last week, is that on a deep level, what we're finding is that Shmir Sabris, which is the whole Indian of those 130 years, everything is revolving around that Indian of Pagam Bris, going back to Adam and Chava, is somehow connected with the head of the neshama. There's the body of the neshama, and then there's the head of the neshama. And what we're seeing is a strong relationship between the inyan of Shmir Sabris and the inyan of the head of the neshama. And so that's where we're going to Bez Hashem get to in a week or so, to figure out in Avodas Hashem, what exactly does it mean, the body of a neshama? What does it mean exactly, the head of the neshama? And in what sense is the head of the neshama related to that inyan of Shmir Sabris? Because that's what we see so far, and that's what Shovavim is about. Again, Bez Hashem will get there. We just have to build up the building blocks. The Arizal said that when you have a big neshama that's about to enter into the world, the Sitra Achra is always nervous of that. Because a big neshama comes to the world, it makes a lot of waves. In a good way, and hopefully in a good way. So sometimes the only way for the Sitra Achra to allow, for the Sudden to allow a big neshama to come to the world, is if it comes to the world without realizing what it is, with it being raised in an environment where it doesn't even chap its kaiches, because then it's not dangerous at all, right? It doesn't even know what it is. So the Rebbeinu Shalom is masking sometimes for that to happen, but the Rebbeinu Shalom always wins, and the Rebbeinu Shalom has a way of even those neshamas discovering their kaiches at some point. But there is such an idea that the bigger neshama goes to the lower places. So within the heads of Nishmas Yisrael, within the heads that found their way on their fourth incarnation, found their way in Egypt, those neshamas that were conscious enough of who they were as holy neshamas to find their way to the 600,000 Yidden, the bodies, those are Gevaldig neshamas. But those neshamas that were still stuck in the Erev Rav, those are the biggest, the deepest neshamas. So it's not just like the few leftovers of the stragglers left behind. Those were on some level the deepest neshamas. And so Moshe Rabbeinu is very much drawn to them, and he feels that he needs to bring them out. And Moshe Rabbeinu's decision of bringing them to, with the Exodus, despite the fact that these Mitzrayim have not been worked through, and the neshama inside of them is trapped amongst all the garbage and the filth that these people embodied as well, because again, that's what we're going to see. These big neshamas found themselves in the opposite of everything that they represent. It's much the lowest places. So you have these Erev Rav coming with us, and when those neshamas that were trapped in this Erev Rav become now incorporated into Klal Yisrael without them being refined, then all the imperfections and all the sediment and so on also becomes absorbed in the system of the Jewish people. And as we're going to see, that causes long-term effect, long-term damage. Now you have neshama heads, deep neshamas being incorporated into the system with all the imperfections and impurities that they come with them because they weren't worked through the catharsis of Mitzrayim. So now you have terrible damage, as we're going to see that we suffer till this day because of that imperfection, because of that that because of the impurities that became absorbed within the collective system, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. We're going to talk about that soon. But let's just finish up some loose ends about this inyan. Take a look at Marmuk in the room one. Okay, so this is going to be, the first paragraph is sort of going to be summing up everything that we just spoke about, like as follows. Again, it's from Sharp Sukkim. Today we're just going to, it's just straight Arizal. We're not even going to pretend, okay? Just straight Arizal from Sharp Sukkim. So this is from Parashat Shemais. It's all from Parashat Shemais. V'da, you should know, kibeis b'chinas hayim. At the end of the day, at the end of the exile, when we were about to be ready to leave, we now end up with two categories of neshamas. Within the heads of Nishmas Yisrael, two categories. Yesh neshama sheniskanu lagamri. You have the heads of Nishmas Yisrael, which made their way to their Jewish bodies, and having gone through the exile of Mitzrayim, are now fixed, are now ready, are now prepared to receive the Torah in a holy way. That's one category. The Nizgalglu b'Bnei Yisrael, these are the neshamas that became incarnated and became connected to the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. Shabadaru in that generation. After the 70 souls came in and they developed into 600,000, those heads of Nishmas Yisrael from the Egyptians that transfer over to them and go through the Golos are now rectified. But then you have other neshamas, the deepest neshamas, that were not rectified, that is Galgu b'nei Yisrael atzmim, that are still found themselves in Mitzrayim. Oisam Shemol Yosef, and says the Arizal that this inyan of the heads of Nishmas Yisrael originally finding themselves throughout Mitzrayim, that's why Yosef Tzaddik gave a bris milah to the Egyptians when he became second in command. Because Yosef decreed bris milah specifically on those Mitzrayim that he saw with his eyes as having within them a trapped head of Nishmas Yisrael. The Gam Yaakov Avinu Amr Chazal, and even Yaakov Avinu, when he finds his way to Mitzrayim with Yosef, Chazal also say Shagam Hoy Megayer Gerim b'Mitzrayim, that Yaakov Avinu also was preoccupied with converting converts, with being Mekayr of Mitzrayim. So, what are they doing? What's Yosef Tzaddik interested in giving bris milah to Goyim? What's Yaakov Avinu interested in bringing being Megayer Mitzrayim? The answer is Ham B'chinas and Neshamas Haniskar. They were handpicked, they were hand selected by Yosef and by Yaakov Avinu. Those neshamas that needed extra tipul, that needed extra work, and bringing out and allowing their neshama, the Nishmas Yisrael to exit. And said that result, these Mitzrayim that were given a bris milah, that were even converted by Yaakov Avinu, did not mix up with the rest of the Egyptians. That created a cultural divide within Egypt between those Egyptians that were now somehow connected to the Jewish people and the rest of the country. And said that result, within their cities, these Egyptians culturally they felt connected with Yidden, and maybe they were not actually Yidden yet, but they followed the culture of Klal Yisrael. Whatever Klal Yisrael was doing, they felt culturally connected. Is such a thing? As the pasuk says, that Yosef Tzaddik sent the and again, was always a code word for Erev Rav, or these Mitzrayim that had within them the heads of Nishmas Yisrael. Yosef Tzaddik takes the and puts them in their particular cities. Shem Oisam HaGerim Shekaimu Mitzamila. These are the Gerim that Yaakov Avinu was involved with. The Yosef Tzaddik gave a bris milah to. The Afrishim Ba'aram Yichades designated them in their specific cities. For Yinikar Misham Mitzrayim, separate and isolated from the rest of the Mitzrayim. For Lo Yehoi Merovim, they weren't mixed up with the rest of the Egyptians. And the reason for this is, again, all this purpose, in order to allow the transition from those neshama. The intention was never that these Egyptians should leave Mitzrayim. The intention was paving the way to allow the trapped neshamas of the heads of Klal Yisrael in these people to be transferred to Klal Yisrael helpfully, and then Klal Yisrael will leave. But again, the problem, and that happened for the vast majority of these Egyptians. And that's why at the end of the day, not all of them actually left Mitzrayim. But the problem was those last few holdups that were not able and ready for the spark of Yiddishkeit within them to be transferred. So that's when there's a debate between Moshe and the Rebbeinu Shalom. What do I do with these people? I can't leave them here because it's everything, The whole purpose of Galus Mitzrayim was to save these neshamas. I can't leave them, but yet they're not ready to be taken. So what do we do? So that's when Moshe Rabbeinu sacrificed. He said, okay, I'm going to take them, but they're my responsibility. I'll make sure that I go to work to fix them. And Moshe Rabbeinu is still working on that to this day. That's what we saw. Okay. So fine. That's all really what we saw last week. So nothing really new. So now we're just going to tie up some loose ends and just explain some amazing things in terms of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim from this context. Okay, because this is mamash a new way of looking, of thinking about Galus Mitzrayim, Gulus Mitzrayim. It's a new history. So take a look at Marmukah number 2. Va'ata Nevar. Now says the read. Now based on all that background, now let's explain Inyan Gulasam, the process of Gulas Mitzrayim, the redemption from Mitzrayim. V'lama haya de Moshe Rabbeinu. Why dafka Moshe Rabbeinu? Why all of a sudden Moshe Rabbeinu has to be the one? First of all, why do you even need a Moshe Rabbeinu? Why can't Hashem Yisbarach himself just take us out finished? Why do you need a Moshe Rabbeinu? Who is Moshe Rabbeinu? V'lachin Nevar, Inyan Moshe Rabbeinu. So now let's explain the Inyan of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's an amazing thing. Moshe Rabbeinu is not a person; he's an Inyan. He's a sugya. He's the Inyan of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu. So until now, we've seen that every single yid, whether it be, again, we're focused more now the heads of Nishmas Yisrael, is coming. Their original existence came to the world, right, because of the Pagama Bris of Adam and Chava, right, from Adam, those 130 years, yes, which means that every single individual neshama can be seen as a piece of that larger entity, which is called the head of Klal Yisrael, the head of Nishmas Yisrael. You have to understand, Klal Yisrael can be seen as individual components, but there's also the sum total, the collective whole of Klal Yisrael. So you have individual pieces, but then you have the collective whole. So he says as follows: Moshe Rabbeinu hu bechinas hadas atzmai. Moshe Rabbeinu is the collective head of Klal Yisrael itself. Asher mimenu yotzu tipi hashchas zera shel adam rishon. Shein bechinas kol bnei Yisrael shavai sador degalos mitzrayim tinisker. Every single Jew is a tipa zera, is a little piece of spiritual genetic material of Adam and Chava. But who is Adam's mind b'chlal? In other words, a little bit of a background. Again, whether this is true medically is completely irrelevant. But according to Chazal, the tipa zera of a man originates in the mind. The das, the mind of the brain of the person, that's where the tipa begins to form. It travels down. Chazal say such a thing, again, whether it be physically or spiritually, it travels down the spine, and then it formulates as the tipa zera, which means that every tipa is existing on its own, but in its root, it's part of that mind. So the same thing with Adam, right? All the heads of Nishmas Yisrael are every individual neshama is a tipa zera, is a piece of genetic material from Adam. But all of it is coming from the mind of Adam. So the individual Jews and the individual souls that are trapped in the Egyptians trying to make their way to Jews, those are the individual tipa zera of Adam during those 130 years. But who's the brain of Adam that all these tipa zera are coming from? Where's the brain that is the root of all these individual neshamas? That's Moshe Rabbeinu. So Moshe Rabbeinu is the embodiment of the brain of Adam, the mind, the das of Adam. And every single individual Jew is now a piece of that mind. This is why that generation is called the Dardeya. The word Erev Rav is also the gematria, the word das, because the Erev Rav is the unrefined version of these neshamas that are coming from the das. So this is what's going on. So who is Moshe Rabbeinu? This is why Moshe Rabbeinu has such a connection to these neshamas of Yidden and Mitzrayim, because he is the brain that all these individual fragments are coming from. Mina Moshe Rabbeinu, again he says the second line, Bechinas hadas atzmai. Moshe Rabbeinu is the das of Adam himself. Asher mimenu yatzu tipi hashchas zera shel rishon, that all these fragments come from. Shein bechinas kol bnei Yisrael shavai sador degalos mitzrayim tinisker, that are all these individual Jews of that generation. The nimsa, which means he called bnei Yisrael, that all the Klal Yisrael of that time, v'gam kol ha'erev rav, shiat mitzrayim, the Klal Yisrael and the erev rav, right? Because they're all just, whether it be rectified neshamas or unrectified neshamas, right? Kulam anofim v'nitzaitzes tipei zera sheyatzu min hadas atzmai. These are all, again, tipa zera that come from the das of Adam Rishon. V'manofim shel Moshe Rabbeinu. And now that we can define Moshe as the brain of Adam so now these neshamas could be seen as branches of Moshe Rabbeinu. They're extensions of Moshe Rabbeinu. They're Moshe Rabbeinu himself. This is why we find from Chazal that Moshe is shakol keneged Klal Yisrael. Chazal says such a thing, that Moshe is equals all of Klal Yisrael. So like if you put all of Klal Yisrael on one side of the scale and Moshe on the other, it turns out even. So what does that mean? Like the amount of mitzvahs that Moshe Rabbeinu he put on tefillin as many times as 600,000 Yidden. Like, what does that mean exactly? He put on tefillin obviously a less amount of times, but his tefillin is more chashiv, is as chashiv as all them, like in quality. What does it mean even? How does the Rebbeinu Shalom even judge a matter of evenness? He was born a Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's born a Yankel Goldstein. He has his kaiches, he has his kaiches. What does it mean even b'chalal? The answer is, on a deep level, what Chazal is saying is that all of Klal Yisrael are branches off of that mind that's called Moshe Rabbeinu. And in that sense, they're both the same. They're even. Moshe Rabbeinu is where all these neshamas are coming from, and Klal Yisrael is Moshe Rabbeinu, the mind of Moshe Rabbeinu in fragmented form. It's one and the same. Moshe Rabbeinu is Klal Yisrael in its concentrated root form, and Klal Yisrael is Moshe Rabbeinu in fragmented form. It's the same in it. It's the same thing. So he says as follows: El Yisrael Hoy Misakanim. Again, so all of these neshamas are connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Klal Yisrael ones are the Musakanim; those are the neshamas that were rectified. The Erev Rav, Lahayu neshamas Niskanim, but the Erev Rav are the unrectified neshamas. Adayin Kviroi, they're not worked out properly yet. This is why Moshe Rabbeinu is now going to be the Redeemer, because Moshe Rabbeinu is a major part of the story. V'nei Zman Golos Mitzrayim. Now it's an amazing thing. Listen to this. Zman Shruch HaKodesh. V'nei Zman Golos Mitzrayim. We know that how long was Golos Mitzrayim, the exile? 210. But really, Zman Golos Mitzrayim Mishenichnasu La B'nei Yisrael. When Klal Yisrael entered Mitzrayim, Hayu Redu Shana, right? Reish Dal Vav, 210 years, right? Ubekuf Lamed Shana Merishanim. But really, for the first 130 years, it was during those first 130 years of Galus Mitzrayim that all the we've been talking about of the bodies of Nishmas Yisrael being there and finding their heads and the heads of Nishmas Yisrael moving from Mitzrayim into Klal Yisrael and Klal Yisrael going through the Galus and the Tikkun taking place. Everything we've been talking about is really took place predominantly during the first 130 years. Why 130? Because 130 is the exact amount of time that the heads of Nishmas Yisrael, which is exactly what all Galus Mitzrayim was about to begin with, that was the amount of years that they came to the world in a damaged way during the times of Precious between Adam and Chava, 130 years. So the first 130 years of Galus Mitzrayim, that's really when the real avodah is taking place to fix these neshamas that came to the world during the damaged 130 years. Kedugmas Kuf Lamed Shanim Shapirish Adam, corresponding to the 130 years that Adam and Chava were separated. Vaylidam, and they were sort of brought into reality. Now, after 130 years of being in Galus Mitzrayim, fixing and correcting the damage that was done during those 130 years that these heads of Nishmas Yisrael were brought to the world originally, so now Moshe Rabbeinu can make his appearance into the world.
To reemerge.
Moshe Rabbeinu, now the head of Adam and Chava, can now reemerge in a complete state, because all the fragmented pieces of Adam's brain, so to speak, has now found tikkun, or at least a number of them have found tikkun enough for the reemergence of the collective brain of Adam, which is Moshe Rabbeinu. And we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was born after 130 years of Galus Mitzrayim. How do I know? So he says, simple math, right? Moshe Rabbeinu was 80 years old, V'tseisem Mitzrayim, when we actually left Mitzrayim. And we know that the Galus Mitzrayim in sum total was 210. So how long was Galus Mitzrayim existing for when Moshe was born? So that's simple math. 210 minus 80, it's 130. So 130 years is how long Galus Mitzrayim was before Moshe could come to the world. Sepis. The answer is because, again, 130 years, those were the amount of years corresponding to the original 130 years of Adam and Chava being separated. And those years needed fixing in a very strong way to even allow the reemergence of the Das of Adam to come into the world, which is Moshe Rabbeinu. But after 130 years of Tikkun, now the brain of Adam could reemerge in Moshe Rabbeinu, and the process of Gula can really begin.
It seems like all the Tikkunim, the purification, was not done by the Mitzrim of the Rav. It was the Yidden who had to go through that Avodas Perach. So is it all the Avodah in the body, and then you just rely for the soul to come in? We don't find that the Mitzrim went through any shibud or any transformation.
So it's true. Once the Yidden were suffering in Gullus, once their corresponding head entered into their body, so to speak. So when you have a yid in the slave pits, even though originally he was just a head, but him being there, the body, but him being there, the heads of Nishmas Yisrael became this galgal in their bodies, and now you have a full, complete neshama being imprisoned, going through the slave pits. But you are right on a certain level, which is that the head by itself, it's the body that needs to work on behalf of the head. But it's because the head became connected with the body, and now slavery can take place. It was those holdouts of the Erev that didn't allow the head of Nishmas Yisrael in them to make their way to their corresponding body, that they're not having the tikkun. Because you're right, the tikkun has to happen through the avodah of the body, with the head being incorporated within it. Because the body is the one that does the work. But again, these are just words right now. But Hashem, the next coming weeks, we'll talk about this more in avodah, and we'll understand a little bit more what we're talking about. Because this is classic Arizal, where it's just like, it's just it's up here. And Chassidus comes and brings it all the way down. Chassidus is sort of the body to the head of the Arizal in a certain sense. So that's what we have to do this as well. So right now we're just, drawing a skeleton. We have to sort of fill in the blanks.
So the shibud was the purification process, almost like the ziyas tachpelos of the Rishon.
Yeah.
In order for the neshama, for the Rosh neshama to come back and better go for neshama.
The Rosh, right? The head re-enters the body during this process of Mitzrayim, and then when now that union between body and head in an actual Jew is now enslaved, and he goes to that tikkun, that's fixing.
But the Chatzim didn't have a neshama, so it didn't have a guf.
That's the problem. That was the problem. They didn't have a tikkun. No need. They needed to, because the heads were still damaged because of those 130 years, but they didn't have a tikkun because they weren't enslaved. The tikkun has two stages. Number one, the head has to reunite with the body, and that entirety now has to go through the slavery of Mitzrayim. And so you need that to happen. So you needed those neshamas, the heads of Nishmas Yisrael, stuck in Mitzrayim, to first find their way to Yidden, and those Yidden enslaved. So that happened for the vast majority of heads of Nishmas Yisrael. But those few holdouts that did not make their way from Mitzrayim to Klal Yisrael, they didn't find their tikkun. Now they're stuck with all their impurities and all their sediment, and that's what the Erev and Moshe Rabbeinu decides to take them in, despite the fact that they're not able to, that they're not purified yet. That's exactly what's going on. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. Next paragraph. V'zeh tam nachon. Now, understanding who Moshe Rabbeinu now is, Moshe Rabbeinu as the reemergence of the mind of Adam. V'zeh tam nachon beinin Amram shapir shmi Yechev. Now we could explain why Moshe's birth was such a strange thing. Because we know that, again, what's the basic history? We know from Rashi and Chumash that Moshe Rabbeinu's parents, again, were Amram and Yocheved. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu was the third child, right? So there was already a Miriam, there was already an Aaron, right? But Moshe Rabbeinu was now born from Amram and Yocheved. But we know that according to Chazal, before Moshe Rabbeinu's conception, Amram and Yocheved had this idea of separating from each other. Why? Because Amram think, every baby boy is now being thrown into the river. What am I going to waste my time having a child? The child's going to be killed. So you know that Miriam comes and says, "You're worse than Pare. At least Pare is only decreeing the boys, and you're by not being with your wife, you're destroying girls as well, because you don't know, maybe you're going to have a girl." So because of that, Amram and Yocheved remarry. And the Chazal say that not only did they remarry, they made a whole chasana, as mamish, not just like a private thing. They made a whole new chasana. And Chazal say a miracle took place that Yocheved returned to her youth. She literally physically returned to how she was when she was young. And now, in this the second marriage, Moshe Rabbeinu was born. That's the Maisa. Okay, so the Rizal asks some basic questions as follows. He says like this. Shapir Shmi Yocheved Ad Yosef Bas Kuf Lamed Shana. How old, by the way, was Yocheved at the time? Yocheved was 130 years old when she had Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because Yocheved was born right as Klal Yisrael were entering into Mitzrayim. She was Nolda Bein HaChametz, right? She was born in between the walls, mamish. So she's born right away there, and now that's when Galus Mitzrayim begins. 210 years begin. 130 years later, she gives birth to Moshe Rabbeinu. So Miriam is now 130 years old. Vaz Haledes Moshe. That's when Moshe Rabbeinu was born. Al derech shapirish Adam Echava. So why is all this happening? Because in order for Moshe to be the reemergence of the mind of Adam in this rectified state, you have to go through history has to repeat itself. There has to be a reemergence of that process of those 130 years. You need an Adam and a Chava to separate, to now come back together and to produce a Moshe Rabbeinu, who's going to be the embodiment of like the son of Adam, the son of Adam. So he says as follows. You'll see what the words are. So he says, "Vaz haledes Moshe al derech shapirish Adam and Chava," just as Adam and Chava is separated. V'achikach haledes Sheis, and then Sheis is born. Right? Sheis is again who is Sheis? After Adam and Chava are separate 130 years, they come back together and they produce Sheis. Sheis, therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu is going to be related to Sheis. We see this in this farm that Moshe Rabbeinu is a reincarnation of Sheis, because again, it's history repeating itself. Adam and Chava are separate 130 years. They come back together, and a son is born. That is the B'nokar Davua. That is the main descendant of Adam. The main child of Adam is Sheis. Cain and Hevel don't work out, right? Hevel is killed. Cain is destroyed in the Mabul. The progeny of Adam, in truth, is Sheis, and that's what so Moshe Rabbeinu is a reemergence of this story. He says as follows: Just as Sheis was born when Chava was 130 years old, right? Because Chava was born in Gan Eden, right? That's the day she was alive, and 130 years later she has Sheis. Now we could explain why does Moshe Rabbeinu's birth need such strange things? We know Aaron was born just 3 years earlier, right? Then came so if Amram is separating from his wife because he's worried about this decree of Parai, the decree was going on for a very long time. Very, very long time. And he was willing to be together with his wife to have an Aaron a few years back. All of a sudden now he has this thing in his head, he can't be with his wife anymore. What changed? Nothing changed. Why didn't he separate from his wife, when the decree first kicked in and Aaron wouldn't have been born? And also, why do you need this other miracle, Shechazul and Arusa, that Yechever returned to her original youth? Why is that necessary? Just a few years back, when she's 127, she has Aaron, without any miracles. All of a sudden, she hits 130, now you need miracles to allow her to have a child. Why? It's an unnecessary miracle. Kaidim Shetel and Moshe. Very Gil Shan Kaidim was that oldest Aaron 3 years before that she gave birth to Aaron, everything was fine. She didn't need miracles. Void, another question. Why did Hashgacha Pratis work in such a way that he has to remarry his wife? This whole it's such a strange story. Allowing is setting up the scene for Moshe Rabbeinu. But the answer is the answer is because now that you need, after 130 years of all the Tipa Zera of Adam fixed, and now you have the reemergence of the collective whole of the Tipa Zera, the reemergence of the mind of Adam in Moshe Rabbeinu, who is Sheis, right? That's what's going on over here. So now you need Moshe's parents to embody Adam and Chava. You need them to embody Adam and Chava, and their reunion is going to be not just Amram and Yocheved, it's now going to be Adam and Chava. And Adam and Chava are going to come back together to bring into the world a physical reflection of Adam himself. Just as a son is a reflection of the father. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is. Moshe Rabbeinu is the reflection of Adam because of a healthy union between Adam and Chava. And this all happens after 130 years of them being separated. And Amram and Yocheved now had to be the re-emergence of Adam and Chava in the world, coming together, B'Kedusha V'Tahara, after fixing their mistake of 130 years, coming together and giving birth to their son that's reflective of who they are, and that's Moshe Rabbeinu. So he says as follows: Lachin hutzrichu Chava eishes Adam Rishon lisaber nishmasa b'Yocheved eishes Amram. This is why the soul of Chava had to make its way back into the world in Yocheved. Adam had to find his way back in Amram. And now when Amram and Yocheved are no longer just Amram and Yocheved, now Amram and Yocheved, and contained within them is Adam and Chava. And now they need a second marriage. Why? Not so much because of Amram and Yocheved, but because now they're new people. They're now Adam and Chava at the same time. So that's, by the way, there's a lot to talk about over here, but there's it's getting late already, but there's a famous conversation that took place between Reb Chaim Brisker and the Rogatchover. That Reb Chaim held that whenever a person gets married, it's not the pshat that you say Erev Mikdash and you're married, and now you're married. Chaim had a chiddush that every single moment you started the chain reaction at that moment of Erev Mikdash Li, but every single second the marriage is renewing itself. So there's a famous Maisa that Reb Chaim said that over to the Rogatchover, and the Rogatchover said Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov. Like he obviously not agreeing with that idea. But this word from the Arizal would be a little bit a kash on Reb Chaim, right? Because if marriage renews itself, then now there's a reemergence of Adam and Chava in Amram and Yocheved, so the marriage is renewing itself. So let it renew itself as them new people of Adam and Chava as well. The fact that he has to go through another marriage because there's more neshamas contained within that, maybe it's a shtickle right to the rugged shaver that marriage is it doesn't renew itself automatically. You have to renew it when you need, when the time comes. So that's already. So he says as follows. V'zesai, this is the meaning. Let's go to the next paragraph. V'zesai, this is the meaning of the pasuk. V'tar isha v'teled bein. It says in pasuk regarding the birth of Moshe that the isha became pregnant and gave birth to a son. The isha, call her by her name. Her name is Yocheved. Why the isha became pregnant? The answer is Isha Rishon Chava, because this is a reference that Yocheved is not just Yocheved now. In terms of Moshe Rabbeinu's birth, which is part of this whole long history going back to Adam and Chava, so Moshe Rabbeinu has to be seen as the reemergence of a unified progeny of Adam, namely like Shais, just like Shais was after 130 years of separation. And so Adam, his parents have to therefore be seen in this way of Adam and Chava. So his mother is being called the Isha. That's what Chava is. Isha Rishon Chava. Ulazeh Ramzu B'Zayar. And this is what's an amazing thing. You see the Mamish the Ruach HaKodesh, what the Arizal does to fill in all the blanks of what we find in the Zayar. The Zayar says one line about this. The Zayar says, Vatari Isha V'Teled, that the Isha, Moshe's wife, Moshe's mother became pregnant and gave birth to him. It says in the Zayar, Ben Ha'isha Vadai. This is certainly the son of the Isha. Keda'amar L'Zaisi Kari Isha. As the pasuk says, that Adam said about Chava, that this is called the Isha. So he's like the Zayar. So Moshe is being born from the Isha. Says Zayar, that's the Isha. That's Chava. Shaykhis, what's the Zayar talking about? So now with the Arizal, this whole story of Kuflam Chana and Gilgulim and Mabul and Daraflaga, V'chulu, this is now, that's what the Zayar is saying. It's not what the Zayar is saying. That Moshe is the reemergence of the son of Adam, the mind of Adam in a solidified, healthy way. That's what's going on, and he's the son of Adam and Chava. So Nimsa. So it comes out just to end off Mamish quickly. Ki Moshe Yishar Shadas Atzmai means that summing it all up. Moshe Rabbeinu is therefore the das. Moshe Rabbeinu is the mind, so to speak, is the unified collective whole of all these fragments of Adam's mind. Moshe Rabbeinu is the sum total of that, the collective whole. The holy side of this idea. And the branches, the fragmentation, what comes off of Moshe, and Bnei Yisrael, Shiyatzim Mitzrayim, and Ekraim Dardea. That's the generation of Dardea. Now, everything has its counter, everything has its balance. As the heads of Klal Yisrael are being taken out of the Egyptians and being reabsorbed within Klal Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu is as happening. Moshe Rabbeinu is growing and becoming and materializing, and finally, after 130 years, there's enough of that ingathering to allow the Moshe Rabbeinu to reemerge. Right, that's what's going on. So at the same time, everything has its mirror image. Everything has its negative version. So just as there's the holy version of Das, and there's a holy version of Klal Yisrael, there's the anti-Das. There's the negative version. There's the leftover psilas, right? When the heads of Klal Yisrael are being taken out of the Erev, being taken out of Mitzrayim, what's left is the husk. What's left is the empty shell now, and so that empty shell has until now been enlivened by the spark of Nishmas Yisrael there, but now the Neshama is being gone. Now the Neshama has been taken away. What's remaining behind? As Moshe Rabbeinu, there's the opposite, and that is Bilam. Bilam is the anti-Das. Just as Moshe Rabbeinu is the sum total of the head of Nishmas Yisrael, the anti-head of Nishmas Yisrael, the anti-head, everything that's the opposite of Moshe Rabbeinu is Bilam. Everything is the opposite of Moshe Rabbeinu is Bilam. Bilam hu sharash hadas shel haklipa. Bilam is the embodiment of what Das means in an unholy version. The unholy version of Das is Bilam. Morav Biksas Taiv, and Bilam is able to be sustained. Why is he able to exist? Because there's still some neshamas left in Mitzrayim, because of the Erev, right? Again, what's going on over here? Because some unrefined neshamas left in that place of the Erev, that's sustaining the anti-Das. Because again, everything is covered over by its opposite, right? So you have the heads of Nishmas Yisrael lost in the places of Mitzrayim, and their existence there is sustaining everything that's the opposite of Kedusha. And the opposite is always the opposite of that particular Kedusha. So what the Das of Klal Yisrael means, there's the opposite. There's the Das of impurity. That's Bilam. And that's being sustained as long as there's neshamas left within that world of Mitzrayim. That's what's going to sustain the unholy world of Klippa, the unholy world of Bilam. So he says, this is why, and we'll finish off Baal Peh. This is what we find, that as Klal Yisrael are slowly but surely pulling all the neshamas from Mitzrayim into themselves, Bilam's universe feels like it's collapsing on itself, right? Because that's what's going on, right? Until now, Bilam is being sustained because Nishmas Yisrael is fueling that system. But as the neshamas are being taken from his place and being brought into the Klal Yisrael's position, so Bilam is feeling himself losing kaiches. And the only thing that is sustaining him, even at the end, were those few Erev Ravs still held up, those neshamas not being able to be siphoned off in a healthy way. And when those neshamas are siphoned off, are brought into us with all their impurities, so it means that Bilam is still able to survive through those impurities. That's the connection. This is why Bilam absolutely hates Klal Yisrael, because Bilam sees in Klal Yisrael his demise. He sees his undoing, because he's being sustained because of those neshamas, and as those neshamas are being taken from his world into our world, he's losing his energy source, he's losing his kaiches, and so that begins to fall apart. And this is what we saw last time from the first shir we gave, is that the heads of the sorcerers, which were those last holdouts, right? Those neshamas, the heads of the sorcerers were who? The two sons of Bilam. So Bilam is a major player in this whole inyan. And that's why, again, as we said in the beginning, when Moshe Rabbeinu was having the conversation with Hashem and deciding on his own that he's going to take the Erev out, it's reminiscent of Bilam speaking up to the Rebbeinu Shalom also and deciding things on his own. Just Moshe Rabbeinu is doing it l'shem shemayim, and Bilam is obviously not. But you see this correlation. Again, this is just to sum up, this sort of tie up some loose ends from last week. Bez Hashem, next week we're going to go on to the next shlab and try to make sense of everything we're talking about. Bez Hashem. Okay. Yashikayach. That's the light.
It never made sense.